Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Media Monitor, the show that analyses your news media here at home and abroad. We come to you on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. I'm Peter Ndoro. Thanks for joining us, and this is what you can look forward to on the program today. William Ramatsiba, an office administrator at the University of South Africa, has been exposed this past week, reportedly as being responsible for distributing disinformation or fake news on the internet. It's been 15 years since the magazine Marie Claire launched its international bestseller in South Africa, but now the brand will be saying goodbye after its December 2018 issue. Now, before we get into discussions around those stories and others, let's first take a look at what's on the front pages of our Sunday newspapers today. The Sunday Times this morning is leading with a story on how President Cyril Ramaphosa admitted to have received a 500,000 rand donation from a politically connected Watson family. The disclosure made in Parliament by DA leader Mmusi Maimane was in fact to help fund his campaign and was not for work that his son Andile had done for Bosasa Logistics Group, now known as African Global Operations, which has been named as a benefactor to several other high-profile ANC figures. The City Press has also picked up on the donation made to fund President Cyril Ramaphosa's campaign during the race for the presidency of the ANC last year. The President says that this money will be paid back. The Sunday Independent leads with the former Government Communications Chief Mzwanele Manyi's testimony at the Zondo Commission on State Capture, linking GCIS acting head Phumla Williams with corruption. This whilst Williams was chairperson of the Bid Adjudication Committee. He cited one example where in one tender irregularity, a service provider was paid over 7 million rand, but through separate invoices under R1 million each, so that they wouldn't be flagged by Treasury. The Sunday Tribune is carrying a story on how President Ramaphosa is expected to announce the next National Director of Public Prosecutions towards the end of December. It appears that 5 candidates have already been shortlisted following grueling interviews conducted this past week. The Weekend Argus is running with a story about former Mayor of Cape Town, Patricia de Lille, being back in politics, with the announcement of a new party expected later today. De Lille took a 2-week break after quitting the DA and relinquishing her mayoral chains. The paper is reporting that she's been busy with forming a political party to contest in the general elections next year. Crossing our border, Eswatini's Sunday Observer has a story about a member of the royal family, Prince Sicelo, who was shot by an unidentified gunman. The gun suspected to have been used in the assassination attempt of the prince was found lodged in the garden near a perimeter fence within the premises used by one of the country's well-known lawyers. The front page of Nigeria's Daily Trust is leading with a story about the campaigns for the 2019 presidential and National Assembly elections commencing today. A member of Muhammadu Buhari's presidential campaign organization, Osita Okechukwu, said that the thrust of the president's campaign would be ongoing critical infrastructure projects across the country, and that Buhari would not use money during the campaigns, but rather focus on things that people can see. Alright, so those are your newspaper headlines. We'll take a dip at those a little bit later on as well, and also what's inside those papers. But to tell you, let's start with one of our big stories now. Print media has suffered yet another blow with the closure of Marie Claire South Africa. Associated Media Publishing AMP announced that it would not be renewing its license, saying that the last issue of the South African version of the international magazine will be published in December. Marie Claire, a women's lifestyle glossy launched in South Africa in 2003 in partnership with French owners Groupe Marie Claire. AMP CEO Julia Raffaeli says in a statement that their business has become South Africa's most digitally and event-led multimedia company in the lifestyle space, And as the license holder of the Marie Claire brand came up for renewal, we felt that it was the right time for us to concentrate on our efforts on our digital and creative offering. So yet another magazine has closed down, adding to the already shrinking landscape of print publications. This mostly likely comes with job losses and the asking of a bigger question: will newspapers and magazines actually completely disappear from our shop shelves in the near future?
Become defensive. Don't worry. You must know that we have listened, we have heard.
I'm a brilliant mathematician and also statistician.
Great.
All right, so that clip's for a little bit later on. Let's have this discussion now. And to help me take a look at this story, actually, I'm now joined in studio by my guests. And I'm going to start with you, Charlie from the National Press Club. Thank you very much for joining us and welcome to you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And Indra Della Ronel. Did I say that correctly?
Almost.
Oh, my goodness. And I knew I was going to struggle with that. Go on, put me out my misery.
Delanero.
There you go. There you go. All right. So, gentlemen, let's start with this Marie Claire story. And, you know, it was just the other day we were hearing other publications closing down. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on the future of publications, magazines, newspapers.
It is worrying indeed when any publication has to close down. But with the challenge from digitization, it is becoming very, very difficult for magazines that are aiming at a particular niche market to hold their own. Competition is very stiff. And if you can look at the number of magazines we have in South Africa, and they are all fighting for a shrinking pool of readers in any case. So it is really getting tough from the point of view of lack of sufficient readership, to the issue of social media, to the need to package their contents differently and to suit them for their ever busy readers. The challenge is really great. The market is shrinking in terms of advertising as well, and to run a magazine is very, very expensive.
So, Indra, I mean, isn't this just the case of what happened to records and digital music?
Well, magazines have done better than newspapers, and the reason is not so much to do with readers, but to do with advertisers. So if you think of especially Marie Claire, but also we saw this week there's a story in the newspapers about another magazine group with Caxton's, the biggest printing company in South Africa, taking another magazine group to court for unpaid bills. That the thing that kept them going was those glossy ads. And there are advertisers who want that kind of advertising, and they want it in a nice form. They want it, you know, so you can touch and feel it. And we're talking about big fashion brands, you know, the big luxury brands. So that's meant that magazines have been a little bit protected from the kind of decimation that actually really, as you said, first hit the music industry, but has hit the print industry generally. And I think this may be, after, you know, 1 or 2 years of really a poor performing economy, you're seeing that now magazines are beginning to get that squeeze really, really badly.
But also, you mentioned the advertisers, but what's good about digital media is you know exactly who you're advertising to because of the algorithms. You can't do that with newspapers. With newspapers and magazines, you're hoping that you might catch one of your intended targets. And so Facebook and Twitter and all these other platforms are getting the lion's share. And I suppose if you're not getting revenue in, you're not going to be able to keep printing.
You cannot, because printing costs themselves are very prohibitive. Distribution costs are prohibitive. You still have to pay salaries. You still have to pay accompanying expenses. So to run a magazine in South Africa is a huge challenge. Unless you have got some kind of an endless pot of supply of cash, I don't see how you can continue to do it in this very tight market. It is very prohibitive in South Africa.
All right. So, Indra, you mentioned Ndalo Media, which is in the Sunday Sunday Sun newspaper, and they look like they're under a mountain of debt, not able to pay their printers, and I guess this really speaks again to this. I read a PwC report, and it was dated 2014, and they were already talking about, you've got to go digital. You can't be a print magazine anymore. And that was in the States. And yes, South Africa was a slightly different story. But are we not going the same way now?
Well, I think Bill Gates once said, you can see the future, but we underestimate how big the changes to come are. Yeah. We overestimate how quickly they're going to come. So I think we're in one of those situations. Actually, if you're a publisher in news or in current affairs or women's publishing or any of those fields, you actually want to hold on to your print titles. And the reason you do is because you can get paid some real money for adverts. As soon as you move to the digital space, you really can't. The amount of income on digital is much smaller per viewer, much smaller per reader or viewer. And as you said, Facebook and Google take 80% of the market. We had a workshop, I run a journalism and media lab in Johannesburg. We had a workshop a few weeks ago. One of the managers for one of the big media groups here said that they now estimated 8 out of 10 rands was going to Google and Facebook.
Wow.
So for digital advertising in South Africa. So, the reason they're holding on to these print titles and still spending all that money to keep printing them is because actually they're more profitable than their digital activities. So, I don't think we're about to see the end of print. We're about to see more shakeouts, which we've already seen. We've seen we've seen titles going, and we're going to see more. But the ones that work won't disappear because for a while. Yeah. Because until that last bit of advertising income gets squeezed out, they'll still want to print them.
All right. So again, I'm going to use American research, but I've got a feeling once we get fiber and cheaper data, the millennials and all these people, they use screens for everything. The idea of picking up a newspaper is completely alien to them. And I just wonder, it's just not a question of time. Jane Raffaele, who had the license for Marie Claire, already saying we're focusing on our digital platforms and eventing. And that seems to be the way to go.
It seems the way to go, but I trust that newspapers and magazines will be with us for quite some time.
I think you and I just old-fashioned.
Possibly so. But I don't think they will be obliterated immediately. I think there is still room, there is still scope for their existence, but we cannot pretend that there is no shift. The shift is there, the shift is seismic. However, I believe that they will still be there for a foreseeable future. However, we need to do things differently. We need to be more clever than we have been over the time. We need to accept that change is happening. We cannot be stuck in old ways. And unless we move with the times and do what we have to do in terms of digitization, then definitely we are going to be swept away. However, I don't think it will be an event. I think it will take time.
All right. So what might be the new funding model for a magazine?
Well, I mean, this is the problem. The difficulty with digital, and the reason why we still have these titles is because it's really hard to make money on digital. At the workshop we just ran, we had people looking at, in fact, if you look at Daily Maverick now, they've got this new category, Maverick Insider. They're trying to get you to sort of support them, and they'll give you some nice treats. We have, of course, the paywalls, but the paywalls mean that they lose most of their digital audiences. And we have advertising, but that's not very lucrative. We have eventing, as the Raffaele's just mentioned. So let's try and find other activities that we can leverage our brands on and try and get paid for that. But this is all hard, and this is all new activities. And as one of the heads of digital media told us recently in a workshop, each one of these takes a whole lot more work. And so the digital space, yes, of course we're going digital. And most of these media companies have known that for a decade. The problem is how they're going to make money on digital.
Sure. Okay, so there's an MBA question for you, and if you get the answer right, you could make a ton of cash as a consultant. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we take a look at the crackdown of fake news manufacturers. Don't go away.
Ekurhuleni Artisans and Skills Training Center is a practical artisans and skills development center who equips students with the necessary knowledge and practical experience to enter the labor force as semi-skilled workers. There is a strong focus and need for skills training in specific areas like boiler making, rigging, pipe fitting, welding, CNC programming, plumbing, electrical, air conditioning and refrigeration, bricklaying, carpentry and painting at the center. Ensure your future today with the Ekurhuleni Artisans and Skills Training Center.
We are in the fourth industrial revolution.
Things aren't the same anymore.
Technology is taking over much of what we do. That includes how we make payments.
Blockchain is the future.
On Network, we have robots, hackathons, and tech entrepreneurs.
Making sure that your business is well known across all borders. We use social media.
That's Network with me, Spumelele Zondi, on Saturdays at 20:30 and Sundays at 17:30.
Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor. Now, a News 24 investigation this past week has revealed that William Ramatsiba, who's 29, a UNISA employee, is the creator and owner of MzansiStories.com, a notorious fake news website. Now, the investigation further revealed that Ramatsiba and his sister Gracie Rams posted links to their fabricated articles using social media. Now, the traffic generated by these stories generates revenue through adverts placed on the website. Ramatsiba now could be facing criminal charges for hate speech. Right, gentlemen, it seems to be a theme that we will be looking at time and time again. Fake news, fake news, fake news, as coined very well by Donald Trump, even though sometimes he's perpetrating himself. But this one is a bit of a concern because it seems it was done deliberately to generate traffic, to get revenue. It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. And I suppose when it's harmless, it's, you can laugh it off. But some of the things that this man has done has bordered on hate speech and causing some divisions in society. Indra?
Yeah, I mean, we did some research at WITS, some of my colleagues, on South African fake news sites that was published this year. Most of them are like this. In other words, they're people trying to make money. The way to make money is to drive clicks. The way to drive clicks is to create very salacious headlines, be very tabloid. And actually, some of the stories are true.
Yeah.
So they're not all made up.
Yes.
Often they're just stealing content from other websites, news websites, and then they rewrite headlines. They make them much more kind of sensational, and they drive clicks on social media, and that eventually drives some advertising income. So I don't know the details. Of, we still haven't heard from him, so I don't know the details of whether that's true for this. But it is a common pattern. And in fact, my colleagues interviewed someone running a very similar operation in Zimbabwe, who said exactly that. And funnily enough, he was quite committed to doing some serious news as well. He had like a serious site, and then he had his fake news site. And I think that we are probably looking in the wrong place for answers of what to do about it. I'm skeptical about whether we should be attacking him in particular, because the problem is, everyone can gossip online. As the head of SANF, the Editors Forum, said recently, she was talking about people who tweet. I mean, everyone can tweet. If you're online, you can communicate. You can gossip. You can just repeat things your friends said as truth. I mean, this is now, and that's always been the case. We've just amplified it hugely online. I think the problem's the other way around. I think newspapers and magazines and journalism online has to find a way of saying we are different from all this stuff.
All right. So your thoughts on this? I mean, it's becoming a problem because as a consumer, I can't tell the difference between a proper reputable site and a fake news site because they look the same.
And what it does, it starts to bring into question the credibility of your mainstream proper newspapers and news sources. So you wonder if perhaps the answer isn't in the owners of this platform. Should there be more stricter protocols into the use? Will that amount to a possibility of prohibiting free speech? or not. So it also becomes a problem to say, how do you police this reckless and in fact very dangerous use of this platform without actually curbing the freedom to say what people need to say? It is one of those issues of having to balance between the ability to say things on the one hand, and on the other hand, the ability to say things without causing further harm, without causing discrimination, without causing hatred to your intended recipient. We hear from this research that may have been done that money may be the motivating factor, because the more clicks you get on these things, apparently, is the more likely revenue you are going to generate.
You've mentioned the word hatred and racism and so on and so forth. Let's take a look at these pictures now, because they really help me tell this story. So let's start with the Mzansi Stories tweets. And so this was one of the images that this was the second one actually that he had tweeted. Let's look at the other one, because that one was the one that's really for me was a big concern. So the day that the story came out, Dross, he put up this face of a black man saying that he had molested a little white girl. And that was far from the truth. And it sets the cat amongst the pigeons. He then changed it to that other picture we just saw now. And I just wonder, this is the danger really, isn't it, about gossip, which actually has far-reaching consequences.
But that's why I'm so concerned about what Joss is saying, because, you know, we have law.
Yeah.
I mean, that we applied. I mean, Mondli Makanya is writing in the City Press today about the Penny Sparrow cases and those things. We have law. I mean, you don't need to start license. I mean, the road of saying you must license outlets now, that's hugely dangerous. In fact, the Constitution thankfully bans that, and actually we must give that up. That is not a way forward. And I think we mustn't get too hysterical. He's just the same as all those individuals who also tweet things that, you know, that spread hate and violence and stuff that just come from people who don't call themselves news outlets. That's happening all the time.
Okay.
So of course we have to tackle those things. We actually have law to do it, as we've seen with Penny Sparrow. The real issue is what Joss picked on, is the fact you can't easily tell the difference.
Yeah.
And that is not a problem for the people who did Mzansi Stories. That's a problem that the mainstream media has to tackle. Why is it that they don't look different enough? And in fact, obviously the problem with the story you just mentioned of the Dross rape is that legitimate news outlets also stepped into that part, didn't
they? Let's take a look at that now. So I want you to look at this as well, Joss. So let's take a look at what the Daily Dispatch did, which is the tweets that they did reporting the same story, and this is the image there now. And here what they did, which caused a lot of concern, is that you've got a picture of a black man in jail, and they talk about man accused of raping a child at Dross remanded in police custody. It's probably a stock picture, but what they're saying and suggesting is that it was a black man that did this. And we expect more from media outlets, but in this instance it looks as if they're part of the problem.
This is very problematic, and this points to perhaps a lack of thought that goes into the processes of producing a newspaper. Surely by producing a picture like that, you are already sending a message. It might be a subtle message, but it is a message anyway. And in the minds of the consumer, what does it say? It says a man of a particular race has done this. You are already planting that seed in the minds of people. And that, again, is very, very dangerous. And perhaps it brings us to the question of credibility. It's so easy for people to accuse newspapers of lacking credibility, lacking believability, and being spreaders of fake news. This kind of reckless use of a picture feeds into that particular narrative. And how do you defend it? To say, no, we are not. It is very difficult. In other ways, it means newspapers, editors need to take a more proactive approach. They need to take a more active thought into what goes into their publications to make sure that they are not feeding the spreaders of news, that newspapers are fake news, newspapers are dangerous, and that sort of. But this is sheer recklessness on the part of a particular media house.
So the question is, how does it happen in a proper media outlet? Because in theory, you have an editor, you have someone who's checking. I mean, there should be a series of checks and balances.
Yeah.
Is it just an oversight, or do you think it's people just not really being sensitive and in tune with what's going on around them?
Well, it relates back to, I think, our previous discussion about print and digital. I mean, this is not a new thing. Every newsroom is smaller than it was 10 years ago. Every newsroom is also producing hugely more content on much faster turnaround times than 10 years ago. So that was an online story. It wasn't in the newspaper. The online stories, have to be produced every hour, not once a day. So we've put hugely more amounts of pressure on the newsrooms to deliver more and to deliver more quickly.
Yeah.
And so the systems of checking are under more pressure. I mean, I think the editor of Sunday Times, when he wrote the apology a few weeks ago about their coverage of the SARS rogue unit and the death squad in KZN, he wrote, I remember reading his point saying, the real difference between journalism and everything else is verification. Is that if you read something or you see something on our outputs, that means we've checked it. So it's very, very important to trust that works. And obviously sometimes it doesn't. I think newspapers and journalists and journalist platforms have to do much more work to explain to the audience what they do. Of course, acknowledge when they don't, but explain it in more detail, so be more transparent. And I think, we've been having some discussions at the Journalism and Media Lab with journalists and media owners about they need to sort of brand themselves in a more different way.
Okay, all right. So we can chat about this for quite a long time, but we're going to take another quick break. And when we come back, we'll take a look at a couple of international stories, updates on stories that have been running for the past couple of weeks. Stay with us.
This is a space for every woman in South Africa.
I want to speak to the women who cannot walk a kilometer in this country without looking over their shoulders, without being groped or harassed.
I was not born like this. In 2011, I got stabbed by a boyfriend.
How many centimeters? How many centimeters long is the political will to end the scourge of violence against women, against children?
I was locked up in the room for 2 weeks.
There are measures, there are laws, there are policies. But these policies and measures and laws do not speak to these lived realities.
We must fight the culture of gender-based violence.
This is where young men must be taught that women are not their footballs. This is where young men must be taught to respect women.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now, the US Treasury this past week has imposed sanctions on 17 people for their alleged role in the killing of Saudi Arabian journalist Jamal Khashoggi at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in Turkey. Now, this is the first concrete response by the Trump administration to the journalist's death. Among those sanctioned were Saudi Al-Qahtani, who has been removed from his position as a top aide to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, as well as the Saudi Consul General Mohammed Al-Otaibi, and members of a team of Turkey identified as being involved in Khashoggi's death. Now, according to reports, the announcement was unusual for Washington, which rarely imposes sanctions on Saudi nationals. The sanctions do not directly target Riyadh government, considered an important US security and economic ally.
The CIA believes Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman ordered the assassination of dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi. That's according to Reuters sources on Friday, who said the CIA had briefed other parts of the US government on its assessment, including Congress. The report contradicts the Saudi government's claims that the Crown Prince was not involved in the killing. The CIA's finding was first reported by the Washington Post, who said US government officials have high confidence in the assessment. It's the most definitive US intelligence finding yet, linking the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia to Khashoggi's assassination. And it complicates President Donald Trump's efforts to maintain ties to one of America's closest Middle East allies. Both the White House and the State Department declined to comment, and a statement from the Saudi embassy in Washington called the claims in the assessment false. Khashoggi was killed in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on October 2nd. He was a staunch critic of the Saudi government and a columnist for the Washington Post. Saudi officials have said that a team of 15 Saudi nationals were sent to confront him at the consulate and that he was killed by accident, while the group tried to force him to return to the kingdom. Turkish officials say the killing was deliberate and have been pressuring the Saudis to extradite those responsible to stand trial in Turkey. On Friday, a symbolic funeral was held for Khashoggi in Istanbul. Friends gathered to pay tribute to the murdered journalist, whose remains, more than a month after his death, are still missing.
All right, gentlemen, it is an interesting response. And I'm, the skeptic always in these kinds of scenarios. You impose sanctions on people who are facing very serious charges. You might never have to exercise those sanctions, really. So he hasn't really targeted the government itself, even though this murder took place in an embassy, which really is the best form of representation of government in a foreign country. So what do you make of Donald Trump's, is this sort of, I don't know, PR?
You could say in many ways his hands are tied in relation to what action he might want to take against Saudi Arabia, knowing the fact that he's pretty cozy with the prince, and it looks like he is not wanting to upset the relations between the USA and Saudi Arabia because of, we have been told that there's a strategic role that Saudi Arabia plays in the area, in the Middle East area. And there's also the issues of trade, especially around arms. There's huge amounts of money that are happening between Saudi Arabia and the USA over that. So it will look like Trump wants to be seen to be taking action without, however, upsetting the relationship that is there between his country and Saudi Arabia. But whatever he is going to do, I don't think it is going to be enough in the eyes of people. There's so much anger around the death of Khashoggi that unless drastic action is taken against those, not only those who carried out the murder itself, but most importantly, where the order came from to eliminate Khashoggi, because that is the key question. The operators didn't just do it on their own. They must have gotten some kind of instruction from a top person somewhere. Now, was it the prince himself? Was it the government of Saudi Arabia? Did they act on their own? Which I doubt. So the question is, what is to be done by the source of the instruction?
All right. So we're going to go back to the US just now, but very briefly, perhaps, Indra, you can tell me, what does this mean for journalism? Because this journalist, it seems to have blown up the story about how journalists sometimes get killed, arrested, more than any other in a long, long time. Why him and not others, do you think?
Well, I mean, that's difficult to say. I mean, I think he was a journalist. He was also a highly connected journalist in Saudi Arabia. But I think what's also interesting about this, I completely agree about the point about the risks of journalism. I mean, one thing I think is very interesting about this is the way the Turkish president has agenda set and used media so effectively. So Khashoggi, as you say, is not the only journalist who's been killed in recent times. He's also not the only one who's faced harassment, arrests. But the Turkish president has managed to keep this right up there, at the top of the news agenda now for 2 weeks. And he did it really, really effectively. Leaks in the Turkish press, little elements, and each time forcing the Saudis a little bit further, and then some new evidence comes out which shows that what the Saudis said can't be true. Incredible media management.
Okay. I think you probably hit the nail on the head that there was a presidential intervention in this particular story. Okay, let's go back to the US. And again, another issue that deals with journalists. A US judge on Friday ordered the Trump administration to temporarily lift its ban on the news network CNN's correspondent Jim Acosta. His White House press pass had been revoked last Wednesday after a contentious interaction between himself and President Donald Trump at a press conference. Well, CNN filed a lawsuit on Tuesday in the U.S. District Court in Washington, stating that the White House violated the First Amendment right to free speech, as well as the Due Process Clause of the Constitution, providing fair treatment through judicial process. Well, this was Acosta's reaction soon after the ruling.
I just want to say that I'm very grateful for what happened today, and grateful for my colleagues in the press who stood by us through all of this. This was a test, and I think we passed the test. And at this point, honestly, guys, this is just any other day here at the White House for me. I would like to get back to work, and so should you. So go back to work, and we'll keep on doing our jobs.
All right, Jim Acosta there. And it's always difficult to be the story when you're trying to tell the story and write the story. But this wasn't interesting. He called it a test. And it really has been a firm test for President Trump. What's going to change, do you think, as a result of this?
Probably not very much. I mean, the most interesting thing about it, I think, was the fact that Fox News had joined that case that CNN brought.
They couldn't be left behind, though, could they?
Well, I mean, this has been, obviously, the whole, and going back to our points about what media is and can it distinguish itself from all the other noise and people who tweet, I think Fox News has been part of blurring those lines in the US, whereas CNN has been sort of trying to stand up for some line about what distinguishes journalism from everything else. I think we've got our own stories on this. I mean, you may have read this week, two journalists working for the Committee for Protection of Journalists were arrested by intelligence services in Tanzania this week, and our government didn't support them. The local staff did, but actually the minister here came out and actually endorsed the Tanzanian line that they had been thrown out for visa violations, when actually they were picked up by intelligence services and interrogated in the middle of the night. It wasn't visa violations, and were, hugely intimidated and actually rather scared. So there's an example of our government actually not supporting journalism and that protections that we certainly.
All right. So I mean, Donald Trump has had his hand forced a little bit here. He threatened this week on another interview. He says, "Listen, if people don't behave, I'm just going to stand up. I'm just going to say thank you very much, and I'm just going to go." And that's a way, I suppose, of doing it the other way. But surely he can't win this.
But he has treated the media with serious disrespect ever since he came into the presidency. And he has had many sparring battles with various. It is his style. It is his way. And with Donald Trump, he always wanted to be his way or no way. That's why he is saying that if needs be, I will cancel a press conference and go back to my office and leave you guys like that. He is not building bridges. He is not saying, fellows, let us meet each other halfway. I am prepared to go this far. Can you also meet me here? He is saying it's my way or no way. That is simply not presidential. I don't think. You do not behave like that when you are a president. And in fact, media wars are not going to help the president. We know, especially in this country, in the USA, what has happened previously when you try to take the media on. And I'm not saying that he should just meekly lie down on the ground and be trodden over. I am saying you need to act presidential. You need to say, I need to get my message out to my people. Who are my people? Those are the people that are served by these television networks that are here, the radio stations that are here, the website news that are here, the newspapers that are here. So what do? You then build bridges and use this media to get through your message instead of being antagonistic.
Well, he's saying, forget you lot, I'm going to use Twitter and get straight to my constituents. And so there you go, President Donald Trump, who has said that the media is the enemy of the people. And here on the continent, we often hear our president saying that if you print things against the government, you're unpatriotic. So it seems we can't win. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we take a look at the newspapers and more, all coming up after this break.
They were revered and they were honored.
We didn't harass our people. We revered our people.
But they have since fallen from grace.
Aung San Suu Kyi is blocking those investigations.
Should leaders be honored while still alive or posthumously? Watch African Perspective on Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Central African Time on SABC News, Channel 404.
You're watching Media Monitor. It's time now for us to take a look at what's been happening in your newspapers and what's been playing around. But let's start, actually. I want us to look at the newspapers and how they've been covering one of the big stories of the week, which was the resignation of the former Home Affairs Minister, Malusi Gigaba. So this is what the Citizens' take was. They said that he was given a promise that he'll get a nice job at the end of the day of this. Then we have the Sowetan there, Naile Walk. SA has begun waiting for, and it had been coming for some time. The Star also weighing in, Gigaba not off the hook yet, of course. He's could possibly face some legal backlash for his stories. Where to now for Gigaba? And that's the Pretoria News. And we also see a reshuffle likely, because with him quitting, we now do have two vacancies, Environmental Affairs and Home Affairs. And final one, the Mercury, I resigned for the sake of South Africa. So, interesting week for Malusi Gigaba. It had been just escalating and escalating. And I suppose the deadline for the Public Protector became the final moment. And I just wonder, he waited until literally the day before the Public Protector deadline. Was he pushed, or did he resign for the sake of the country?
I have no idea. I noticed, Monali Makani in the City Press today argues that actually it was the video, not the deadline, that was the final straw. I've no idea. I think an interesting discussion in the Sunday papers is about accountability. I think, this is a very different situation, I think, to the resignation of former Finance Minister Nene. But in both cases, we've had resignations, which has been quite rare here. So I think it's an interesting thing about, are we creating some new precedents about the grounds on which actually political figures, ministers in particular, have to resign, and what are those, and will that mean that others will now come?
So, Joss, what's your take on this? Because, the High Court in Johannesburg found him wanting in terms of lying under oath as far back as February. So, the Public Protector didn't come up with anything new.
Yes.
It just confirmed what was already confirmed by a court.
Yes.
So why did it take so long, do you think? And then, interestingly, on Friday, he comes up in another report from Treasury regarding Eskom and Transnet, and perhaps compromising in some ways tender procedures. Was it just that it was just too much in the end, and that they really did want to keep him somehow?
I think it's a question of accountability, and whether people who are caught up in this kind of situations are made to account enough, or whether they always think they can somehow get away with it because they are protected, because the party is always there for them, because of their positions, they are untouchables. I think it boils down to accountability. And in a situations where accountability is lacking, people just tend to think that they can get away with it. And unless they are pushed into the kind of corner that Gigaba was pushed it, he clearly wanted to stretch it as possible, as long as he possibly could. And he did. He did not resign at the first sign of trouble. In fact, up to now, he keeps on saying that he is not guilty of anything. He is denying everything completely.
Oh, he lied in court, and this is what the courts have said. He's lied under oath.
Yeah.
So, do you think the newspapers, because that's really at the end of the day, if I'm a citizen and all I have to do is to rely on is the newspapers, do you think I understood the story of, A, how serious lying under oath is, and why a minister should resign as a result of this?
I mean, I think that's really hard for journalists covering these kind of stories. I mean, I remember a discussion some years ago with the Leadership in Corruption Watch. You know, if every day there's another story the journalists are writing about, you know, someone being caught telling a lie, someone being apparently strong evidence that someone has ignored procedures about contracts, etc., etc. You know, how do you keep telling that story in a way that you don't worry that it just starts to sound like the one I read yesterday and the one I read the day before? And how do you organize this so that people can really keep a big picture in their head? And that's, I think, you know, generally not easy. I think one of the things that's changed, though, I mean, February to now is quite a little time. On the other hand, if we think of Nkandla, that was 5-7 years from the first story to actually a piece of action by the state. So, you know, maybe there's some sign that the cycle's getting a bit quicker, in which case it's slightly easier to tell the story because we can actually refer to something we might remember.
Okay, so let's look at other stories in the papers. We've got front pages stories. Is there anything that grabbed you straight away when you were looking at the newspapers?
Well, the issue of, and again, the money that the president apparently received from
And that's
Bosasa.
the front page of the City Press, is that right?
The City Press is running with it, and I think the Sunday Times is more or less on the same story. And my question there is, you know, who else? We have already heard of several high-profile people who received some kind of money from this company. This company,
is Bosasa now.
Yes, they've received billions in government contracts for various services, and for some reason they seem to be finding it necessary to repay certain people in power. And you wonder who else is going to come forward and say, I also received this from Bosasa for this purpose and this purpose. I mean, they've built walls around people's houses, they've taken people's kids to varsity, paying varsity fees and so on. Now they paid for apparently they paid for the president's race last year for the ANC presidency. Who else is going to come forward and say, me too?
So the president says he didn't know that this had happened in his name, and he says, look, I'm going to pay back, and I want a full inquiry of all the donations that were made to So is that going to be enough, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think it goes back to your previous point. I mean, the story that interested me in the Sunday papers and online this weekend was the coverage of the 3 Treasury reports that were released on Friday. Now, these are about not 500,000. These are about something like 50 billion rands of money spent by Transnet Eskom. You know, really as big as one article put it, as this is as big as the arms deal or bigger. So these are hugely significant, and this is the nearest we've got to really some of the insights about what went on. And as you said, Giga's name came up in those reports too. But I mean, these are, you know, so did Brian Molefe and a whole other number of executives in both those organizations. So I think this is one of the difficulties about perspective. I mean, of course, this is a big political story because this was to Ramaphosa's campaign, and it's the head of the opposition making the accusations. However, to me, in the long run, this is probably a bigger story. And it also points to the time. It takes a long time to work out what happened. Was this just money, or was there a quid pro quo? That's not an easy thing to find out. So I think these Treasury reports are really, really important. And you can see only a couple of journalists have really got through them all. You know, it's obviously a lot of work to try and analyse them. Farrell Haffajee on Daily Maverick, and Deval van Rensburg in City Press, particularly.
All right, so we're running out of time, but what I would like to ask both of you, let me start with you, Joss. What do you think is going to be the big story this week? I suppose there's a certain public enterprises minister who's going to appear at the Zondo Commission.
Yes, the Zondo Commission will continue to give us some headline news, and I think Pravin Gordhan is going in this coming week. So we have had excerpts of his testimony, of his affidavit. Is he going to say more? Is he going to reveal more in terms of this? I think that's definitely the key story this coming week. I also suspect the Ramaphosa money will still be with us for quite some time to come.
All right. The same for you, Indra?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I don't think the Ramaphosa story is going away. The Zondo Commission, of course, every week, I think, for the foreseeable future is going to be a very important source of stories. I think people are going to be investigating and pulling out more stories out of the Treasury reports. There's also some couple of interesting other things. I think the arguments about the poet laureate, generational issues that I think are currently very interesting about, who should be the faces of leadership today.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid that's where we're going to have to leave it. Time flies when you're having fun. Thanks so much indeed for joining me this Sunday morning and sharing your insights with us on all the stuff that's going on. Thanks so much indeed.
Thank you so much.
All right, and that's where we're going to say thank you so much for watching the show, and don't forget to make a date with us at the same time next week for more Media Monitor. From me and the team, have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.
We at Network explore all things technological.
The modern battlefield is the battlefield of the mind, and the tools for affecting the mind are social media.
We look at how technology advances medicine and education.
Children can learn up to 60% more information in a shorter condensed amount of time using virtual reality as a medium for instruction.
From music, gaming, even computer-generated supermodels. Be a part of our network Saturdays at 8:30 p.m. and Sundays at 5:30 p.m.
Can the President, acting outside the Cabinet, instruct you as the Minister as to which board member you must appoint?
No.
Democratic Alliance and Mayor Patricia de Lille have come to a mutual agreement that in fact resolves the question of the leadership of the DA government in the city of Cape Town.
This is a space for every woman in South Africa.
I want to speak to the women who cannot walk a kilometer in this country without looking over their shoulders, without being groped or harassed.
I was not born like this. In 2011, I got stabbed by a boyfriend.
How many centimeters? How many centimeters long is the political will to end the scourge of violence against women, against children?
I was locked up in the room for 2 weeks.
There are measures, there are laws, there are policies. But these policies and measures and laws do not speak to these lived realities.
We must fight the culture of gender-based violence.
This is where young men must be taught that women are not their footballs. This is where young men must be taught to respect women.
To be a part of something like this makes me proud, and I think that to be able to report the news in a fair, just, independent and impartial way is what the public broadcaster stands for.
We at Network explore all things technological.
The modern battlefield is the battlefield of the mind, and the tools for affecting the mind are social media.
We look at how technology advances medicine and education.
Children can learn up to 60% more information in a shorter condensed amount of time using virtual reality as a medium for instruction.
From music, gaming, even computer-generated supermodels. Be a part of our network Saturdays at 8:30 p.m. and Sundays at 5:30 p.m.
SABC is independent and impartial, and it's important that as we deliver the news, we do so without fear, without favour, without prejudice, and that we ensure that we get the multiplicity of views so that our stories and coverage is balanced.
We pride ourselves on being impartial as well as independent. On the agenda, we basically break down the stories of the day, give it more substance and give it more detail. So all in all, we basically take the news agenda of the day forward.
But more than that, we'll be able to reflect the stories of ordinary folk, people who are trying to make ends meet, facing the most incredibly difficult obstacles and circumstances, and that they will find that their realities are expressed on the SABC.
To be a part of something like this makes me proud, and I think that to be able to report the news in a fair, just, independent and impartial way is what the public broadcaster stands for.
Hanover Park is known to be a playground for gang members. Several pupils failed to attend classes due to gang shootings.
The impact of these gang wars is that we find that learners stay away from school.
There's a lot of disruptions, but yet I try to come every day to school so that I can have a better future.
As an education department, which is not our primary mandate to address crime, we do what we can to ensure that our learners and teachers are safe in schools.
In pursuit of good results for a better future, these learners have all come here to what is commonly known as study camps. They bath, eat and sleep here. Learners believe that their sacrifices will bear fruit.
Once we give the best of our results and we get enough chance to spend with our teachers.
The local business people are giving us food, are supporting us big time.
This year we must have 100%.
This is Tanya Mukwamu, co-founder of a mobile application called MaxiCash. The app is aimed at helping African expatriates send money home.